So to give you more of a foundation of where the psychology of adult development begins, I want to introduce you guys to the topic of lifespan perspective. And what this is how psychologists and people who study adult development actually study it. So they look at it in two different phases, which is early childhood and late adolescence, which goes into adulthood. And you can't really study someone's adulthood or adult development without looking at them as a whole. And this is what lifespan perspective allows us to do. And there are 4 key features to lifespan perspective. The first one is multi-directional, and what that means is that when one area of development increases, it sometimes decreases in another area. So one example of this is that when you grow older, your vocabulary most likely increases because you're exposed to more words and you've been able to practice communication more often. But as your vocabulary increases, your mobility might decrease and your speed and your reaction speed might decrease as well. So that's one way that as you age, one area can develop more and get improved and become better, and another area can decrease. In my life, I felt like as I became more able to read books on my own. So when I was younger, I used to read pictures, and that's how I read my books. And I thought I was really reading when I was really just looking at pictures and making up my own stories on what the pictures were saying to me and not reading the words. But as I began to read the words, I stopped reading pictures, and I feel like that was a area of my imagination that decreased. And there are other ways that we as adults can practice our imagination and creativity, but I feel like the more I learned practical things on how to do things, it left less room to practice my imagination. I know that's not a good thing, and I know some artists and some musicians are still really good at practicing their creativity and imagination, but that wasn't something that was, I believe, my purpose in life. So that is one area that I feel like I developed in multidirectional area. As I became more literate and I became to practice these things that I was learning in school, such as the sciences and math and reading, I became less creative. I know that's not a positive way, but I just want to give you guys examples as we're going through this in my life, so you guys can also think of ways where maybe as you developed and grew older, that you were able to increase in some areas of development, improve in some areas, but also you notice maybe a decrease in certain other areas. And if you notice a decrease in areas that you want to improve upon, again, it's not too late. And that's what I want you guys to use these studies for, is to catch certain things before we get too old and just lose our ability. Like if you don't use it, you lose it type of idea, that we're able to then catch them before it's too late and then carry them on out into our adulthood as we get older and older. The next key feature of lifespan perspective is plasticity. And what that means is that it's honestly the opposite of you can't teach an old dog new tricks, because research and science shows that you can teach an old dog new tricks as long as they're willing to learn and are willing to put the time in. So a person's capacity to learn and develop is not predetermined, and you can continue to learn and improve upon new skills and develop new skills well into your old age, in your 80s, 90s, if you're blessed to live in your hundreds too. There's not a stop to that. And actually, the more that you continue to learn things, it makes your brain more malleable and more flexible and more dense and more young overall, so you won't have the problems of dementia as you age and get older in your age. So an example of this is that although it may be harder, they say, to learn a new language once you pass a certain age, it's never too late to learn a new language. Like it's never too late to learn a new skill. My grandpa, he's almost in his 80s, but he's always getting the latest technology, like the smartphones. I remember my mom saying he was the first to get one of the video games in their neighborhood. So like that is just an example of someone who's using technology to continue to learn new skills. But you can also do that in areas that you're just interested in. Like if you want to play a saxophone, that's another thing my grandpa did. When I was born, he started to teach himself how to play the saxophone. And now he has his own band and he's hired to play at bars and coffee shops. He's just the coolest. So that is one way and one example that even late in your age you can learn new skills and become really great at those new skills that people will hire you for them. Next is historical content. And this perspective just shows that like we as individuals, when we're born in a certain era or generation, we experience things that affect all of us. An example for that could be 9/11. A lot of millennials experienced the effect of 9/11 and then the recession not too long after it and how that affected us. And people experience it differently, also depending on what culture you grew up in and the family you raised, a lot of background history. But the fact that a lot of these affected such a large group of people, that you can see how that also later on affects development. For me, experiencing the recession and just seeing the effect that it had on so many individuals and so many people who are working, that lost their jobs and everything, even right now during this pandemic, the coronavirus and COVID-19 and everyone being locked down, like this is also shaping us, and it's also shaping those who are younger than us. My nephew, he's about 11 years old, and I just wonder like how later in life how he's gonna share this with his children. Because for me, the recession taught me, and even this experience right now going through this pandemic with the virus, it's showing me that you can't really rely on one source of income. And I think I told you guys earlier last week that I have like I'm mainly a consultant, but I have side gigs, which is teaching and training and development. I'm also teaching, tomorrow I'm teaching a course on emotional intelligence virtually, but anyway, and I also nanny and tutor part-time. So I was motivated to have so many sources of income because I knew that at any point in time, something like a great recession could happen. Or now knowing like a pandemic like this can happen and so many Americans can be out of work. A lot of my contracts that I had for consulting had to get postponed. And if I didn't have any other source of income, if I wasn't teaching and if I wasn't training on the side, like I would be destitute. So I think this pandemic just shows, it just reduces my amount of faith in having one employer. But also, if you think about our parents, it was taught for them to get a good job and stay at that job until you retire, because there was pension and they had a good retirement plan and 401ks, and all these were different back then than they are right now. So that's just a way that a historical context can affect your development. But also, not even looking at like economy-based things, you can look at the civil rights movement or the Great Depression or the wars, World War I, World War II. All these things affected those people who were coming up during that generation in one way or another, that they can all relate to. So looking at how historical context affects your development is another important aspect to study or to look at within yourself when you study adult development and you move more into these chapters and everything. The fourth and final perspective of the lifespan perspective is multiple causation, and we're going to get a little bit more into that in the next video. But this shows that within life there are a combination of different things that affect your life, and people develop from a wide variety of different forces. So you want to look at these forces in more detail to see how the combination of them all has affected you. And the four things are the four Causations of adult development are a combination of biological forces, psychological forces, social cultural forces, and life cycle forces. So we'll look a little bit more in detail with that in the next video, but I wanted to give you guys at least the four key features of lifespan's perspective, which again are multidirectional, plasticity, historical context, and multiple causation. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.